We are honored to have Jacqueline Patterson be our keynote speaker for day 2 and set the stage for the rest of the day. Jackie knows more about community resilience building than almost anyone I know. She is the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project. It was named after Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who in 1968 became the first Black woman to be elected to the United States Congress. The Chisholm Legacy Project is a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leaders. Its mission is rooted in a just transition framework. It aims to connect Black communities on the front line of climate justice with the resources to actualize their visions. Before that, Jackie served as the senior director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program for almost a decade, or for over a decade. She's the coordinator and co-founder of Women of Color United. She has written and spoken extensively on equity and resilience building for climate adaptation. She's worked as a researcher, program manager, advocate, coordinator, activist. She's worked on women's rights, violence against women, HIV and AIDS, racial justice, economic justice, and environmental and climate justice. We are so honored and grateful to have her here to share her wisdom and experience with us. Thank you so much and welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. Sorry, it is a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, looking forward to spending this time with you all talking about a vision. It's such a joy to be able to talk about vision and talk about what should and could be. And so often when I am speaking with groups, I have to spend so much time kind of getting us mired and how wrong the current system is, that in the end, there's barely enough time to talk about vision for what should be, because I feel like in some ways when we talk about the types of large scale transformations that are needed, that many people need to be convinced of how bad things are now in terms of systemically, to really be able to embrace total systems change that's necessary. So I appreciated the prompt for today to really just focus on vision and on what the world should be and what the world already is. And so you'll see in the presentation that that even though I kind of talk about the tenets of a resilient and kind of brave new world, I also rooted in the fact that it's already happening. So without further ado, I will bring my slides up, and so that we can start to see some images here. But I appreciate all the introductions in the chat and knowing who's here and who'll be watching later as well. So let me share screen, and there'll be a little bit of awkward toggling as I go play a couple of videos, and so that'll be kind of going back and forth a little bit on that. But in the meantime, let me get us going. Slideshow, and there's all these. Okay, from the beginning. Okay, so as you see, I title it "Being the Change," and not only is a new world possible, but that it is indeed already happening. And so I wanted to get us started with kind of a strategy framework for just transition that was put together by a number of communities, organizations representing base building communities from across the country, and really talked about what just transition looks like. A lot of times when people talk about just transition, they are talking about it in the context of transitioning from our energy system the way it exists. But this is a broader framework for just transition that recognizes that the energy transition is in the context of a much broader transition that we need from an extractive economy. And so the economy as we exist now, we know is kind of rooted in kind of principles and practices around exploitation, around enclosure of wealth and power, militarism, the real concentration of this notion of a colonial mindset, and then this extraction of natural resources, extraction of people, just just extractive practices all around. And so the idea of the just transition is to really stop the bad and really build the new solutions that are visionary and that are dismantling the current system as it is. And the system and the new economy is really rooted in this notion of caring and sacredness, both for each other and for the earth and earth systems. It's about have a purpose around ecological and social well-being. It's around making sure that a relationship with resources is one of regeneration, because we know that our earth is divinely designed to regenerate. The sun rises every day. The seeds, we have millennia old seeds that regenerate by design and so forth and so on. So we need to lean into the earth systems, and that cooperation with each other and harmony with the earth is the way that we need to center our economy. And of course, deep democracy as opposed to the corporatocracy that we have going now. So this is the strategy framework that we think of when we talk about just transition in terms of frontline communities that have come together to put this together. So I'm framing a little bit this discussion around these 7 principles that called the Nguzo Saba, which is 7 principles in Kiswahili. And they're the principles of this Kwanzaa, but that was put together really to talk about the ways that we reform society and community in our orientation. And it is all about unity. It's all about that cooperation we talked about. So the Moja is about unity, and that's kind of the foundation. Kuji Chakalia is about self-determination. And so a lot of the work is around so much of what happens in our society happens to us as the 99%, so to speak. And so as I talked about before with the corporatocracy, as opposed to a true democracy where we are determining for ourselves, for the people, by the people, so to speak. Ujima, collective work and responsibility, again, recognizing our interdependence as people and that we have to work together and be responsible for each other in order for us to move forward. Ujama, it's cooperative economics, is similarly talking about the way we cooperate around goods and services and so forth, but again, thinking cooperatively. Nia, purpose, how we build our community, how we restore our communities to the way they should be is at the center. Creativity, recognizing that culture work and innovation and creativity is important. And Imani, faith, and not so faith both in terms of whatever spiritual practices folks have, but also faith in ourselves. Faith in our ability to rise above and to really advance this systems transformation that we all need. So I want to kind of begin us with the work that we do is all about centering community voice and community leadership. And so this is a community in Baltimore, nearby where I live, that is putting forth a vision, and the vision, as was stated before, solutions are both visionary and oppositional in terms of the bad. And so this kind of grounds us in kind of a vision of what should be, but also opposition to what is their experience in their community. So this is a video that was created by this group, Free Your Voice in South Baltimore. So hopefully this will go well. Hold on, I need to stop sharing and restart. Let's see, new share, I think. Okay, yeah. Your screen sharing. Huh. Maybe. We try to stop share altogether and then do that again. 1 second, sorry. And okay. All right, so hopefully you can see this and someone will let me know if you can't, and I'll play this for you.
My name is Destiny. I was born and raised in Curtis Bay, a tight-knit community in the city of Baltimore. Curtis Bay is my home, and it means a lot to me. which is why I want to show you what it's like to live here. Here's my high school. Last year, a group of students and myself created a human rights group called Free Your Voice. As a group, we transformed the way that we looked at the world in terms of our basic human rights and what we want for ourselves, our families, and our communities. We have a lot of things that we're proud of in our community. This is our garden. Beautiful, isn't it? The garden provides fresh fruits and veggies for the community because we don't have a local grocery store. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not a fan of bugs. And as you can imagine, the garden is filled with them. But it's worth it because the garden brings the community together. A lot of students from Curtis Bay Elementary School and community members helped build it. We made the garden from the ground up and we're all really proud of it. It's something we can call our own. Now I want to show you our park. A park can serve as a kind of sanctuary, a safe place where children can have fun and be themselves. It's kind of like living in your own little universe, a place where the ugliness of the world isn't allowed. All communities should have this, but we don't. Come on, there's one last place I want to show you. This is Curtis Bay's backyard. Growing up, I knew the industry was here. I could see it, I could smell it, but I learned to ignore it. For some reason, I never felt welcome. I wonder why. Over time, it was almost as if it wasn't there, but it is. Curtis Bay and communities surrounding it are suffering on a daily basis. The pollution threatens our health and our environment. We know the air we breathe isn't clean. We know this, however, we lack answers to basic questions about how bad it is. What's worse is that we often don't play a meaningful role in the decisions that affect us. And the only ones who seem to be paying any consequences are community members who have to breathe the air. We suffer the most. Despite the pollution in the industry this community already has, there's a plan to build the nation's second largest incinerator, less than a mile away from our school, our garden, and our park. The last I checked, Curtis Bay is a community just like any other. People live here, our children, our families, our friends, and I feel the sanctity of human life is not being acknowledged or respected. All of this makes it feel like community members don't matter and are irrelevant, and that we aren't humans at all. But we are. I'm human, all the people of Curtis Bay are humans, and as humans, we have the right to fair development that respects our rights and puts community needs first. But this will only happen if we begin to learn, reflect, and act together in a way that allows us to solve problems that we're all facing together.
So that the voice there was Destiny Watford, and she actually was, I think, the youngest winner of the Goldman Prize, and she won because they won that campaign. They actually were the change that they wanted to see in the world. They were successful. This group of really youth-led activists who were successful in stopping the building of what would have been one of the largest incinerators. So, oh, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so yeah, unfortunately, this is a reality in too many places. And so she so they fought that fight. They did a combination of, of course, real community organizing, a great strategic communications plan, including creating this video and otherwise. And so that they prevailed, and it was a beautiful thing. So as she talked about, this is really the essence of the beloved community, the community that we want, and the path to get there in terms of having a vision, eliminating the threats, and then putting forward the actual alternative in terms of the vision that they want. So they are really thriving with their community garden and moving forward. They still have, those coal piles are still there, and they're still kind of fighting what already exists, but they were at least able to block the encroaching new threats. So from there, I'll have kind of a list of steps that I think are critical to, and steps that I think we all share as frontline communities that are critical to advancing beloved community, a community where we all thrive, where we have self-determination and so forth. And so I'll give some components to that and who's already doing it. So first, in terms of eliminating the almighty dollar, so to speak, and this notion of this extractive economy, there are communities around the world that are engaging around a alternative currency or eliminating currency altogether, and having systems like the time dollar system that's more of a barter system, or combining kind of these alternate currencies, but the currencies are based on, you have currency based on the bartering of goods and services and so forth, and really moving away from the economy that has gotten us to where we are today. So these are some of the examples of those places. I need to go into presentation mode so that I can see my notes, but in the meantime, let me go from here, see how far I can go. The next is talking about reclaiming the land. We know whether it's the establishment of these United States, Turtle Island, which was by displacement of the original inhabitants. So really some of the work around land back movement. And we also know that as Black people in our communities, we have been displaced from our original place of country of habitation and brought here, and still had our original kind of wealth displaced from our wealth and our land to then come here. So there's a conversation and a negotiation and really a collaboration with Indigenous folks around what it means to ensure that Indigenous folks have justice as it relates to land sovereignty, and what that means in the context of us now being here and being residents and citizens of this land, this occupied land, and what that means for us. So there's conversations around that and figuring out how that goes. But so there are great initiatives that are going on around community land trusts, and where people are coming together to own land collectively. And again, those conversations about reparations, both for Indigenous folks and for Black folks as it relates to land. So different entities like Right to the City are really grounding in this kind of work. And then there's some great examples of where this is happening, such as with the Earthseed Land Collective in North Carolina. There's an Earthseed land project also in California, and so forth. So opening the borders, uniting the people, recognizing that, so not only just in general, is this a good practice, is these kind of false borders are in themselves kind of a product of an extractive economy. But in addition, recognizing that in the context of climate change, that the United States is 4% of the global population, yet 25% and upwards of the emissions we're responsible for in terms of the emissions that drive climate change. So people who are having to leave their nations because of resource wars, or because the crops have dried up, or because of disasters that are decimating their lands, and seeking real refuge here, because it is a land of plenty. And instead of greeting people by putting them in cages, or greeting them on horseback and using the reins to herd people, thinking about how do we actually welcome people in the bounty of our lands? How do we reposition how we even do international affairs in a way that people aren't being driven from their lands? How do we ensure that we're not continuing to drive these emissions that are driving climate change? So all of that, but also thinking about how do we create a sanctuary nation. This is a schematic of the sanctuary cities that exist across the country, which there were more than I actually anticipated when I looked this up. So that was exciting to see. But we have a growing sanctuary movement that's rooted in churches, that's rooted in different municipalities, that's rooted in various communities that are starting up communities to say that the neighbors are working together, making sure they're looking out for each other, stopping raids, really resisting deportation orders and detention practices and so forth. And so this is what's happening across the nation. thinking about food as a human right. So all the things that we require for health and well-being are considered to be human rights. But in the United States, there's hardly ever conversation or framing around human rights. And so this is what we have to make sure that people don't like the term entitlements, but I mean, the world is 2/3 water. The world is full of land that produces food. So that instead of a scarcity mentality, we have to resist the enclosure of these resources, resist the privatization of these resources, and really ensure that we all recognize that we all have the right to, and we all have the possibility of universal access to all of these resources. So we have folks who are already growing this movement of developing our own, cultivating our own food at the local level, from Philadelphia to New York and to Louisiana with Dat Farm, and again, a youth-led project, and beyond. This is Leah Penniman, who has been a leader for Soul Fire Farm and advancing this notion of local food. Is another group that's growing their own food in Minnesota, a place where you don't necessarily think of in terms of bountiful food possibilities. You think about largely in the South, but anywhere you can grow food if you think about the right crop rotations. Thinking about energy as a human right as well. Again, for some folks, it's not in any way something that is assumed that folks should have access, but again, the sun, the wind are both natural elements that give us the option for energy for all, and we have to lean into that. So whether it's native renewables or solidarity, there's folks all over the country that are recognizing that, developing community-owned, community-controlled microgrids, and ensuring that we have access. And we're wrapping it into making sure that there is livelihoods for all. So this is a project that was involving formerly incarcerated persons and training on how to do energy retrofits, weatherization, and solar installations. And so this is something that where we think about intersectionality. So these are no longer kind of siloed functions or systems, but they become intersectional with how we operate as a society. I almost thought about not even having section headers to really illustrate that it should be a seamless flowing of these systems together. If we think about kind of a cooperative, holistic, intersectional way of being going forward. So this is a place where there was a shelter for domestic violence survivors, and they actually trained the domestic violence survivors to do solar installations, so that, again, intersectional work, so that they're financially independent, so that the solar for the facility means that they can invest what they were paying in energy into other much needed services as part of the Genesee Center for Domestic Violence Prevention and Intervention, and onward. Water is a human right. And Martin Luther King's, one of his speeches, "Where do we go from here, chaos or community?" He says, why do we have to pay water bills in a world that's 2/3 water? So again, resisting privatization that keeps people in a situation where their water is shut off for non-payment and so forth, and recognizing that water is a human right. So we have groups like For the Love of Water. We have the community of Flint, which is re-envisioning the relationship with water after the crisis that took place. When you think about communities uniting, there's the intentional community movement, and not too many BIPOC led. So they actually started a BIPOC intentional community council. And this is one of the communities that is the Black led community, intentional community, the Parable of the Sower, intentional community cooperative. As we think about our criminal justice system, and we think about abolishing a system that literally is doing the reverse of what it is supposed to do in terms of rehabilitation and so forth. It actually is harming, not to mention the fact that there are people in there who have been racially profiled and falsely imprisoned. So much wrong with our prison system. So we talk about what those alternatives look like in terms of embracing a caring economy. There are some great alternative response teams that are developed in San Francisco and otherwise. The support team, assisted response, it started in Denver, is great. They in the first 6 months of their existence, they had 2,387 responses to different calls and none of them resulted in any kind of ticket or citation. And they all many of them ended up being mental health challenges. And so they have people that are on this team that are trained in mental health, and they are able to move people into mental health assistance instead of putting people in shackles and imprisoning them when they're just really active. The behaviors are just a cry for help. And as we think about what it looks like to live together in harmony in this way, this is a group, Sankofa Souls, talking about how do we start to form informal systems of support for each other so we don't reach the point of crisis. And so we actually have cooperative communities. And so, make sure I'm good for time, so 5 minutes left. And so this is actually a gathering of sisters who came together to say, how do we, as national leaders, begin to form replication at the state and local level, well, mostly at the local level, for sisters coming together and supporting each other through both crisis, but also just through dilemmas that they might have in their lives. How do we really center caring for each other in this kind of caring economy notion? And these are just some of the works of art around what it looks like to embody Black joy, as I said. And thinking about democracy and what it looks like to actually have deep democracy, what it looks like to have self-determination versus the corporatocracy that we have now. So both kind of big D democracy and small d democracy, as I say. So whether it's speaking up at city council meetings, public utilities meetings, and so forth, so that we actually ensure that the people are truly governing as opposed to people who have money. And so out of that, we see the results that happen. The Portland Clean Energy Fund, that again was for the people, by the people, ensuring that we transition to clean energy, but doing so in a way that's led by the community, and so that the community truly does benefit for it. It's not something that happens to communities, it's something that's being driven by communities. And this is just some of the work where people have come together and start to realize what it looks like to have truly community governance, people-led governance, and some of the leaders that are arising as a result. And then we see what happens when that, whether it's the squad or whether it's the sister in Minneapolis who was the first transgender city council member who was elected, the two people that were expelled from Congress in Tennessee and now are back in office. This is what democracy looks like, and we can really take this to scale if we continue organizing. And so I wanted to just end us with this poem. Just exactly 3 minutes left, and this poem kind of embodies like what it looks like to organize, what it looks like to dream, and what it looks like to start to organize towards that future. It was written by a sister named Kathy. She's from the Marshall Islands, I believe, and she's writing this poem and saying this poem to her baby. And let me stop share so you can actually see it. Let's see, stop share and new share. Sorry about this. Okay.
Dear Mata Filipino, you are a 7-month-old sunrise of gummy smiles. You are bald as an egg and bald as the Buddha. Your thighs that are thunder, shrieks that are lightning, so excited for bananas, hugs, and our morning walks along the lagoon. Dear Mata Filipino, I want to tell you about that lagoon, that lucid, sleepy lagoon lounging against the sunrise. Men say that one day that lagoon will devour you. They say it will gnaw at the shoreline, chew at the roots of your breadfruit trees, gulp down rows of your seawalls, and crunch through your island's shattered bones. They say you, your daughter, and your granddaughter too, will wander rootless, with only a passport to call home. Dear Mata Filipino, don't cry. Mommy promised No one will come and devour you. No greedy whale of a company sharking through political seas, no backwater bullying of businesses with broken morals, no blindfolded bureaucracies gonna push this mother ocean over the edge. No one's drowning, baby. No one's moving. No one's losing their homeland. No one's gonna become a climate change refugee. Or should I say, no one else. To the Carteret Islanders of Papua New Guinea and to the Taro Islanders of Fiji, I take this moment to apologize to you. We are drawing the line here because, baby, we are going to fight. Your mommy, daddy, boo-boo, Dima, your country, and your president too, we will all fight. And even though there are those hidden behind platinum titles who like to pretend that we don't exist, that the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Kiribati, Maldives, and Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and floods of Pakistan, Algeria, and Colombia, and hurricanes, tidal waves, and earthquakes didn't exist, still, there are those who see us, hands reaching out, fists raising up, banners unfurling, megaphones booming, and we are canoes blocking coal ships. We are the radiance of solar villages. We are the rich, clean soil of the farmer's past. We are petitions blooming from teenage fingertips. We are families biking, recycling, reusing, engineers dreaming, designing, building, artists painting, dancing, writing. We are spreading the word. And there are thousands out on the street, marching with signs, hand in hand, chanting for change now. They're marching for you, baby. They're marching for us. Because we deserve to do more than just survive. We deserve to thrive. Dear Mata Filipino, you were eyes heavy with drowsy weight. So just close those eyes, baby, and sleep in peace. Because we won't let you down. You'll see.
Yeah, so
Our next speaker
oops,
was
wait,
selected
let me
from
turn
more than
this off so
500
that it's not
candidates
continuing
to
play.
represent the
One
voice of
second.
the
And okay, good. So that
society.
was, oh wait, stop
From
that and escape. So that was a poem, one of my favorites. And I will just say to that last slide, and I'll just read it to you instead. The last slide was a quote from Martin Luther King, where he says, life's, well, that's not the right slide, hold on. Or maybe I actually pasted the wrong one. So yeah, so I'll end there with, I think the words of Sister Kathy are a good note to end on, the words and images. So, oh yes, actually I did find it. It's we have before us the glorious opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of our civilization. So I really do want to end on the note of love, because it's what it's going to take for us to really enact all the beautiful vision that we laid out there at scale. So thank you.
Jackie, thank you so much. This is like a whole spiritual lesson in half an hour. So powerful. Thank you. Lots of questions have started coming in. There's a question from yesterday that really has stayed with me, and I'm gonna try and wrap it with a couple of the questions that have come in. And it was from someone who I think is from Germany. And they were talking about how they live in a society that's completely individualistic and self-centered, and how much of a struggle it is for them to even talk about anything like how, I've always heard you talk about the beloved community, how it's impossible to even have a conversation around that. And I think some of the questions that are coming in is really around, David asked the question, can we envision a world where I am because we are, that applies to collective intergenerational trauma. And it's amazing to me how everybody's traumatized in different ways, but we've just never unpacked it. Could you speak a little bit on that? How do we foster this dialogue?
Yeah, thank you. So I think in some ways, one is we are actually working on this teaching environmental justice and intersectionality in the classroom, and that has all of these work plans on how to do it and so forth. So some ways it does need to start young, because as the person from Germany said, people get socialized in a certain way, and then it's hard to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube at that point. But so I think that's really critical, just to start young in terms of helping kids to see this intersectionality and to see how we are interconnected. So I'll start there. Two is localism is super key. Just really being hyper local in this. And I think, like, even though there might be somewhat of a pervasive culture of individualism, there are always those folks that are willing to and open to working together. And once people see what that looks like, it becomes a spark that becomes contagious. So I would say, in that sense, to start with a few, and the few will become many. And so even the reason that I even should do this, root this in all of these examples, is because each and every one of those started with a few. Even the work we're doing in one community, where the community had become so beaten down by, they haven't had running water since the mid 80s, and they didn't feel it. There were all these kind of false starts and people coming in promising this and that and not doing. But we just started having these town hall meetings. At first, like, maybe 6 people came. We had food for 50, and then we just kind of kept meeting, and just like, we were just like the water over the stone, and eventually the stone becomes smooth. And people did start to come together, and now everyone in the community has hydro panels, and now they're working on a community garden. And so it's all, but it was like the water over the stone, just starting small and just continuing, and people come together. So I would say that.
And then there is that moment where suddenly you realize 200 people show up and you are
Yeah.
waiting for 150. The
Yes.
other flip side of it. Yes. So
Yeah.
I mean, community organizing is so dear to our hearts. So I'm going to prioritize this question. Someone anonymous had this question around community organizing.
Yeah.
And I think underneath it, there is so much underlying, because community, it's so easy to just focus on the joyful part of community organizing, but it is labor. I mean, it's so much work. There's so much heartbreak. And this person is asking a question, which I think is really philosophical, around how do you not sell yourself in unethical ways when you're doing community organizing? And so they are asking specifically about community organizing without applying to be a 501c3. But I actually think this is a deeper philosophical question so many of us have to grapple with.
Yeah, so a couple things. One is, so how do you communicate without selling yourself to be so basically, how to do community organizing without, go on, yeah.
Without fundraising, I think, and
fundraising.
without being a 501c3. Without having that, I think, that philanthropical relationship where you're having to fundraise and rely on donations and so on. And if I got it wrong, whoever the anonymous question person is, please rewrite that.
Okay. So I will say that the work that's in the one community I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, it really started with someone who was not fundraising, who was not a 501c3. She was kind of retired on disability, and really just heard about what was happening in this community, about it not having running water since the 80s. And she just started going in there on her own, started going door to door, started doing food and water drives for the community, and was just doing it on her own. And so she was able to do a lot of organizing on her own. I mean, so it's one thing, so 501c3 and that kind of funding is kind of one thing, but in order to move things along, resources were necessary, but she just kind of was able to get donations and donated labor. So it's kind of how one gets resources, but the resources are kind of pretty much a need, but how one gets it, whether it's through a 501c3 structure or through kind of, but either way, you're having to resource raise, you know, so she was able to raise the resources of volunteers and donated products versus going the 501c3 route. And so people definitely do that. And some of the best organizing is done by that. Another community that was fighting against a gas plant, they were able to successfully win the fight against gas plants without any 501c3 engagement. Again, it was a pro bono lawyer who was working with them, and then just the community that decided that they wanted to organize and fight against it, and they were successful in blocking that permit. So again, if that person wants to elaborate on the question, that's the yeah. So many of these are not inside of a 501c3 structure. Or,
And I think to be said and to be reinforced, I mean, just through your entire talk, is how much of it is a labor of love, and you figure out who your close community is doing it, and then the support sort of manifests, you know, a lot of the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So there is a question from R, and the question, he is based in Northern Nevada, Paiute land, and he says it's the ground zero, they say it's the ground zero of the new lithium and mineral rush, and is one of the sacrificial zones of the extractive economy. And their question is, how can we funnel our energy into true alternatives like what you've mentioned, so we don't just reinforce an exploitative, consumptive, violent economic system or green colonialism? I personally love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I mean. I talk about not putting the new wine of a clean energy economy in the old wine skins of the extractive economy, which is a biblical reference for people who don't know, new wine and old wine skins, because of just that very fear, because we know that already we have oil and gas folks talking about now shifting to clean energy. And, you know, they're going to do that with the same principles and practices that they did oil and gas. Yes, it will be quote unquote somewhat better for the environment, possibly, but it's still not the alternative that we want. And so this is exactly why we have to, that a lot of times when I'm doing these presentations, they're so mired in the negative, because to help people to understand that we can't just tweak the system, like, you know, do a fuel switch in the same system, because we're going to have replication of the same extractive practices and so forth, that we need complete transformational systems change. And I think people aren't, you know, the problem is the appetite for people to see that that's necessary for us all to be well and free, because people feel like, oh, well, they're kind of getting along, you know, so, oh, we just need to do a couple of things to make this better. And so to answer the question, I think that that's really the rub, that unless people recognize that we have to kind of dig out the challenge at its root, as opposed to just, you know, just kind of doing some lightweight weeding, that we're not going to get there. But I think that the political will and the understanding of that deep need is only held by so many people, and that's the problem. But I do think that in some ways, like COVID-19 somewhat exposed the depth of the rot and, you know, and so forth. And you are hearing people kind of talk about the need to, for example, like polling before the last election had high polling around like getting money out of politics. So people are somewhat recognizing that the corporatocracy is really running things as opposed to we the people. So there's kind of some dawning understanding. But I think we as the movement need to think about how do we do better around narrative shift, how we do better around political education, so that people understand just how intertwined and how rooted the extractive economy is and how it's harming everyone. So I know that's an answer, but yeah.
I know we have a couple of minutes, and the question that I personally want to ask you, because I get asked it all the time, and you're one of my role models,
Thank you.
it really is around personal sustainability, right? I have so many people, I'm sure you do, coming to you saying, we burned out, I'm burned out, this work is too hard. How do you, I mean, for decades you've been doing this work, how do you sustain yourself? What are your sources of resilience?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It really is going from like a community that's in a fairly devastated to being able to engage with the very communities that I talked about today, to be able to be a conduit for the lessons and the leadership of the communities that are already doing the change that we need to see in the world, to the communities that need, so like being able to be a part of that change and that transfer of inspiration, knowledge, and the modeling has really been how it's life-giving, it's joy-giving, it's hope-giving, to be able to do that. So to toggle back and forth from the communities that need so much in terms of to the communities that are further along down the path, and to be a connector is what sustains me. And then also I try to, just on a more, like I take whatever possible, I will drive as opposed to fly. So that, like, for me, it's like, driving through beautiful places, being able to, if there's time when I'm not working, being able to stay near water or in nature. So some of those kind of practical things also help me as well. I'm big on being near water, so I try to work that into the greatest extent possible. I try to, this is not a manufactured background. This is actually the wall of my of my house. So I had this mural painted, and that, that kind of thing gives me joy. Just being able to really, it was done by a local artist in Baltimore. It's a whole rainforest, so there's like a panther and all. And so anyway, so those kind of, just really trying to work beauty into my life in every way that I can. Yeah.
Thank you, Jackie. This is so powerful, and so much wisdom in all of what you've said. I'm just so grateful. You reminded me to give a shout out to Michelle Johnson Jennings, who's speaking tomorrow, because she's done all that work on land-based healing, and how she's done this research looking at indigenous land-based healing and how it actually works for people who have diabetes and other things. So you just reminded me, for those of us who are nature lovers, nature is healing. So I think with this, we're gonna close I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions. I can see questions still coming in. We're gonna close the session and start the next one. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.